Back at it again with one of my track guides for our Laguna Seca Audi RS3 round of the Racing Boys Championship. This is round number 2, and here are my findings after about 30 or 40 laps with the car on the track. Just my observation so far, and this very well may change by the time we get to the race, but let's launch into it. So to start, I wanted to talk about the car, and I had a race on Monza just to give the RS3 a quick look, see how it felt. It became very, very clear just how different this car is from the S2000. There's a few things that make it so different. One small one is the engine position. It seems like a small thing, but it's worth knowing that the engine is a lot closer to the front of the car, and it is in fact at a 90-degree right angle when comparing to the S2000. This does, I think, contribute to making the car feel really front heavy, and it really is hard to unload those front tires, which is very, very different to the S2000. But the bigger thing here is, of course, the drivetrain. Now, the drivetrain is an all-wheel drive in comparison to what we were previously driving, which was a rear-wheel drive, and the difference there is huge. I had a look, and it seems that at an absolute peak, about 50% of the power goes to the rear of the vehicle, but the majority of it does go to the front, so kind of behaves, in my mind, a lot closer to a front-wheel drive, just with a shitload more stability in the corners, which is kind of nice. But the trade-off here is that obviously it's heavier because it's an all-wheel drive, and because it has some of those front-wheel drive characteristics, the cornering kind of sucks, man. At least that's how it feels to me. It's a lot harder to start the rotation of the car, and it's very easy to trigger ABS, and I think there's a bunch of reasons for this. The simplest one is the front tires are doing a fuckload of work. They're doing most of the acceleration, they're doing most of the braking, and they're definitely doing all of the cornering. So when you're doing all three of these things in quick succession, it's very easy to overwhelm the tires and or trigger ABS because the wheels are starting to slide. It's super easy to do this accidentally if you start turning while braking in this car. And so it feels like this car really wants to brake in a straight line. It doesn't really love braking and turning at the same time. It will just trigger ABS, in my opinion. So there's a lot of concessions here. Why the fuck are we driving an all-wheel drive if a rear-wheel drive is so much better? There is one major benefit, and that is the fact that, hey, it's all-wheel drive. All power goes to all four wheels, which means coming out of a corner, as long as your car is pointed in the right direction, vaguely, you are not going to spin out. You can stomp on the throttle super, super quickly, and it is impossible, in this car especially, to spin this bad boy out. It just won't happen. The thing is going to send power to the rears if it does start detecting a bit of a spin, and it helps to stabilize it. So unlike the S2000, it actually makes sense to throttle halfway through a corner if you are losing grip. It actually allows you to stick back down to the track. So I thought that was really interesting, and it means that if you do get your corner entry sorted, which is definitely a little bit more tetchy, this thing is way quicker out of the corners because you just get an assload of power if you just hit the throttle pretty quickly halfway through the corner, which is pretty nice. So given the above, how did I actually hit the track? Well, let's have a look at my hottest lap, which is a 136.7. And I've got the telemetry up on screen here so that you can actually see my braking and throttle and turning, which hopefully helps here a bit. So on the first real corner, this is actually technically turn 2 up here, but we're going to brake at the white line, which is kind of on the left and right side of the tracks there, in the middle of the rumble strip on the right. We're trying to avoid ABS as much as possible here, and the goal is for us to kiss this first apex here in second gear. I'm off the brakes here for a second, as you can see, and I get back on the throttle pretty aggressively early in the corner so I can hit that second apex under throttle. So one apex under braking, one apex under throttle with a bit of a gap in the middle, and this one actually became pretty repeatable. You then need to get all the way over to the left here to set up for these next two corners. You need to try to brake as much as you can in the straight line at about that 2 board there on the right, and then again get on the throttle nice and early before the apex. Same thing here, braking pretty early between the 1 and the 2, and then getting on the throttle nice and early, maybe even taking a bit of that rumble strip if you're me. Now this next one, the braking point for me was just before this 3 marker, and then I'm trying to brake in a straight line, start the turn, get on the throttle before hitting that yellow apex, and I just clipped it there in this run, so definitely not a perfect one. So coming up to this next one, the 2 sign was pretty much my braking point. It was a very sharp bit of braking, really quick, and then immediately off the brakes, onto the throttle before you hit the apex here again. And then we're just setting up for corkscrew, which is definitely going to take some victims in the race, I think. The braking point was just before the green on the right here, and then it was all about as much braking pressure as I could put in without triggering ABS. Keep an eye on my steering wheel here too. I do try to keep my steering wheel as straight as possible, as it's super tempting to start the turn a little bit earlier, but if you do, ABS kicks in, you just start sliding. It's a bad time for everyone. So do keep your steering wheel straight and then get on the power like a madman down the hill. And this is another bit of an awkward corner. My approach here was just to not brake, go wide and then get off the throttle until you hit this apex or just before, and then get back on the throttle and then dive pretty much straight into the next corner. Again, same as always, braking early, turning in, getting on the throttle nice and soon. This final braking point was at the 3, and then I'm just bringing it right down to second gear and again on the throttle really aggressively over that apex. And that is my lap, which is a 1:36.7.